welcome to episode 157 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Nathan Smith,
Reed Ramsey,
and Andrew Swafford.
In today's episode, we will be doing movies we saw this week in part 1. And in part 2, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1971's A Touch of Zen. A quick word from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Zach's Cold. Zach's Cold. It is coursing through his body and is going to distort his voice and cause coughing. So we apologize.
Though I do think this is the first episode in 150 plus episodes that we've not had to give a disclaimer about sickness, so I think we got a pretty good track record.
This is not a disclaimer. This is a sponsor message.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thank you, sponsor.
Yeah, you started to say that, and I had no idea where that was going, and I was really confused because I was like, wait, don't we have an ad every week that says we don't want sponsors or your money?
We want
so
the
confused.
money and sponsorship of Zach's illnesses exclusively.
It's my illness.
Also, we want Ron's money. He's the only person we want money from.
That's 100% true. We desperately want his money. All right, well, let's go ahead and get into movies that we saw this week. Nathan, you had 2 that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, so personal life update. This week I moved to New York City, baby.
What?
And my first real movie as a New Yorker, a little movie you might know, Jackass from 2002. The first film version of the infamous television show, which aired on MTV from 2000 to 2002, led by the sadistic, devilish ringleader Johnny Knoxville of our fair city. Also includes such legends like Bam Margera, Steve-O, the late Ryan Dunn, Dave England, Chris Pontius, who you non-Jackass fans might know from his great turn as the live-in best friend in Sofia Coppola's Somewhere. You probably know, or probably are familiar with Jackass. You know, it's where a bunch of guys make jackasses of themselves and hurt their bodies and their genitalia in a myriad of sometimes strangely delightful, sometimes horrific ways.
Maybe it's just me, but I feel like you gotta wonder what their genitalia now looks like after, a decade plus.
Nudity scenes with each of
Johnny
them.
Knoxville, his urethra is broken, and he had to use a catheter for a long time. I think he's off the catheter, but so his penis is permanently fucked.
Now we've gotten the important part out of the way.
So fun facts. Your oracle of Jackass knowledge here.
The more you know.
Yeah. So this is something that I missed out on when it was happening. I mean, first of all, I was too young to watch the TV show. I mean, I was 6 when it started, so of course I'm probably not going to watch that. And I don't think my parents were of the mind to let me watch these movies as I got a little bit older. But they were always kind of something I was aware of, something that was there. That maybe friends wanted to watch late at night or something like that. So recently I kind of immersed myself in Jackass and have become a huge fan. I've only seen the first 2 movies. I think that Jackass 2 is above and beyond this one, but I do have to say, I saw this at Anthology Film Archives in New York on 35 millimeter as part of their mini DV series, showcasing movies mostly from the late 90s and early 2000s that were shot on mini DV tape, like Inland Empire and Dancer in the Dark, and a lot of great, respectable movies. But Jackass the movie, the first one, the second and third ones have higher budgets and a higher production value, but this one is very much like the show in that it's all shot on video, which I can't imagine just like rolling up to the multiplex in 2002, going to see this movie that has no overarching plot at all. It's just a series of episodes, many of them culled from the show itself, all filmed on mini DV. I mean, that's just kind of crazy. And like, regardless of what your feelings about this series are, that is kind of incredible that they, pulled that stunt and released a major motion picture in theaters, filmed in this very experimental kind of way. I mean, obviously, if you know anything about Jackass, you probably know that it emerged from the skate culture of the 1990s. Johnny Knoxville was a writer for Big Brother magazine, which was kind of a big skate youth culture magazine. And the idea for Jackass came out of him like wanting to test out, air quotes, self-defense like weapons and tools on himself.
Didn't Spike Jonze have something to do with this too?
Yeah, Spike Jonze is one of the creators of Jackass because he was really big in that community. I mean, Tony Hawk has a brief appearance in this movie, Matt Hoffman, a lot of other notable skateboarders. And so this movie is very much kind of like it's essentially a skate video. I mean, you do have a few sketches here and there that are straight up skateboarding. Like you have the iconic Night Pandas sketch where they are dressed like pandas and they go to Japan and they just like skateboard around Japan dressed like pandas, fucking with people, having a good time. There's another really wonderful episode called Sweaty Fat Fucks, where Bam Margera, Tony Hawk, and Matt Hoffman all dress in fat suits and attempt to like skateboard on a half pipe. And while watching that in the theater last night, I was really struck. I'll sound like a total dumbass saying this, but I was kind of thinking, these are guys for the most part who, grew up skateboarding, who have like mastered skateboarding, who have kind of reached that physical peak and are experts in their sport. And in kind of the way that, people go to art galleries and they see work by abstract expressionists and they say, I could do that. Or, people read like E. Cummings and say like, oh, it's just, kind of nonsense. Like there's no punctuation. What? I could do that. Well, it's like those artists, they learned the rules. They excelled in their field. So like at some point, what is left but to break the rules and to destroy your art form? And that's kind of how I feel about Jackass. It's like these guys have excelled at skateboarding, at BMX, at all these extreme sports. They are kind of true artists in their fields. What is left but to destroy their bodies and to break the rules of form, of good taste. I think you can make a lot of connections to some kind of higher art, more respectable things. Like there's an early, really important piece of video art from the 70s by the artist Chris Burden called Shoot, where the artist Chris Burden is literally just getting shot with a gun, and it's documented on video. And it's not really so much like the form of the piece itself. The video is more just pure documentation. But just, I don't know, the fact that this is a thing that's happening and it's being captured, it's kind of revolutionary. And just visually on that level, there's moments in this movie that kind of recall that there is a scene where Johnny Knoxville gets shot with a beanbag gun at a gun range, and it's like kind of terrifying and looks like a snuff film. And I think there are moments like that you can connect to early video art. In the second Jackass movie, John Waters shows up and has a brief cameo. He plays a magician, and I even think you can connect this to kind of John Waters and what he was doing in the 70s and 80s and kind of confronting notions of good taste with a lot of scatological humor, which this movie definitely has. And I think another maybe connection to the work of John Waters, I think you could, I don't want to like dive headfirst in this and be the one to do this, but I think you could kind of do sort of a queer reading of these movies, because really it's these like ostensibly straight guys all hanging out like in the nude, like touching each other's dicks. It's very homoerotic. And it's kind of in some ways, even though what they're doing maybe offends some people, it is sort of refreshing to see just these like straight dudes just like totally fine with their bodies and with their friends' bodies, and also, like, Chris Pontius is really sexually objectified. Like, I think some of my favorite sequences in the movie are the party boy sequences where he's like in Japan and will just be in a public place talking to somebody, and then he's just like, you know what, it's time to party, and will like strip down to a thong and a bow tie and just start dancing, and it will just be like constantly zooming in on his ass and like really just turning him into like an object of pleasure, for the eyes in the audience who are interested in that. And this is a kind of movie, like I said earlier, that, you know, a lot of people just watch at home with their friends. But I think seeing it in a theater and seeing it on 35 millimeter made the experience even more incredible, because it's a movie that should be really loud. And I think the contrast between the film print and the mini DV brings out a lot of interesting colors, kind of makes some of the already murky colors even murkier. And so you have these like moments where a camera like flies off a golf cart and lands in the grass, and it's like getting all pixelated, and you're just like seeing the water run over the camera, that are actually, I think, quite stunning. And it's also just a movie that deserves to be witnessed with a crowd, because you can all, like, you know, during the moment where Johnny Knoxville is having the webbings in between his toes and fingers cut with paper, you were just all there, like, collectively, like, just moaning and feeling awful together. And there is something about that is almost kind of cathartic. And so it's like, you know, at the end of the day, I can make these comparisons to like more respectable artists. I can talk about this as a queer movie. I can talk about this as like the kind of the worst, most literal epitome of the masochistic instincts of American culture in the early 2000s. But at the end of the day, it's just like a fucking good time. And it just, you know, it has those very, kind of visceral, earthy pleasures and sensations that we all go to the movies for, but just kind of in their most extreme incarnations. And if this movie is like, there's a lot of dumb shit. Like, there's a 10-second like long skit where Steve-O just jumps off a trampoline and throws his body into a ceiling fan. So if that is not as much your bag, I would still recommend you watch maybe the second movie, just because there's some great stuff in there. Like, it ends with this amazing like musical vaudeville number. There's just all this, I don't know, so much wild stuff and so much like just insane bonkers creativity. And also, it's like, some people say, you know, these movies are maybe mean-spirited, but it's like all these dudes were and are really good friends, you know, they have this really palpable sense of family between them. And you see there are some sketches where maybe one person is gonna, you know, do something, and then he's like, okay, you know, actually this isn't for me, and everyone is fine with, like, you know, letting them back out. And it's like, everyone here is even though there are moments where somebody will get hurt or not feel well, or you know, maybe the joke won't end in their favor, these guys are, you know, we're all friends. And so I think it is, at the end of the day, like, in good spirit and in good fun, and yeah, like I said, a great time.
I want to offer, or I guess pose, a hypothetical question.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the point you made early on about it just being really weird how in the early 2000s mainstream audiences drive up to the cinema on Saturday night to watch a narrativeless string of, you know, pranks and stunts shot on a really low budget digital camera. Can you imagine a world now where like that caught on and mainstream cinema changed in some way to like make more space for this like feature length Vine-esque just I don't know, it almost feels like I'm trying to imagine just like,
yeah,
the modern equivalent of like a reel of George Milius shorts, like all these random little 30-second stunts meant to provoke or amuse. I don't know. Can you imagine that?
I mean, in some ways there are things like that. Like, I think this is such a specific example, but like the end credits of Nerve, where you have all these like Snapchat videos with filters. But the thing that like, even though I enjoy stuff like that because it's kind of, I think, challenging form and putting things into movies that we see on other screens, but not on a movie theater screen.
Right.
It's like those are always just these like little novelties and little gimmicks. And what I appreciate about Jackass is that it goes all the way. I mean, frankly, I would like to see way more. I guess there have been other examples too, like the beginning of Spider-Man Homecoming is just like a series of like short vlogs that Peter Parker is taking. Like, and so, you know, there are those things like that. But yeah, it's kind of frustrating seeing that those are only like, you know, 5 minutes of a 2-hour movie. I would like to see, you know, as you mentioned, like a feature length compilation of Vines. I think that would be something else.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I can't say if people would see it or not. I mean, I think that connection to early cinema is really valuable because so much of this is just this kind of like spectacle of like, oh my God, they really did that, you know?
Yeah. Spectacle and novelty were the words I was looking for before that I couldn't quite find.
Yeah. And so it's like in the same way that, you know, people in the early days of films would, you know, be okay with watching 10 to 15 seconds of, you know, a guy getting punched or a couple kissing
or flexing their muscles or putting on different
hats. It's
hats.
like those were things that maybe people had seen in real life, but you know, never in this way before. And I think with Jackass, it's kind of a similar thing. I mean, like I mentioned, that, you know, the paper cuts bit, it's like we've all had paper cuts. We all know what that feels like, but we have never really kind of watched in this way someone else be cut by paper. So I guess the success of something like that would all just be dependent on like what is the content and have we been exposed to it in the same way before? I mean, if there were to be some way to capture with Vines things that we hadn't really seen in that way before and put them all together, then I think it could be something that would have an appeal. But
I think we might be looking at this more in the future. But for those who might want to check out Jackass, the first movie, is it streaming or
I think it
watchable anywhere?
I watched it like a month or two ago on Netflix, and I'm sure it's still on there. I know at least Jackass 2 is streaming on Netflix right now.
Never trust Netflix month to month, people.
Yeah, you're right about that.
That's true. Your next one?
Yeah, so next one is a new release, a movie I've been really wanting to see since it premiered, just because it has been this topic of hype and discussion online in certain film circles for like a year now, and maybe even longer than that. That's the film Nocturama by the French director Bertrand Bonello, which is about a group of stylish young French teens who start dabbling in radical terrorism and in the course of a day carry out a series of attacks and then take refuge in a really ritzy luxury like department store shopping mall for a night while they're trying to hide out from the authorities. I just straight up, I really, really loved this movie. I have not seen any of Bonello's other movies, but he really loves surfaces and textures. I mean, in this, you know, like I said, like half of the movie takes place inside this luxury mall. And I mean, a lot of times the way that he will film these beautiful consumer goods is kind of with this almost nauseating eye, like, you know, it's just like this kind of long commercial of French teens like trying on clothes and like playing around with go-karts and like toy guns and you know, taking over the sound system so they can play Whip My Hair and Chief Keef. And so it really kind of has this like very I don't know, sort of superficial quality to it, where it's just very much about surfaces and objects.
I saw you mentioned on Twitter / Letterboxd that they have the edited version of Chief Keef's "I Don't Like" in this movie. What's going on with that?
Yeah, I don't know. I knew that those two songs that we just mentioned, "Don't Like" and "Whip My Hair" by Willow Smith, played a role in this movie. That was one of the first things I heard about it, because that's kind of crazy that this like French art house movie uses those songs, but the songs actually end up playing a significant role in the film. I don't like. A spoiler is not a word that I would use for this movie, but like the sequence in which "Whip My Hair" is used is kind of jaw-dropping, and the scene with "Don't Like" kind of made me hear it in a way, even though I already like Chief Keef a lot, it made me hear that song in a way that I hadn't really before. You're just like, just being in the theater and hearing that song in this kind of crisp, pristine quality, like, I don't know. It's like,
it's another example of something that you know from another context, but you've never experienced in a movie.
Exactly. It's like, I don't know. It makes like you really feel the bass, and like the Young Chop production has this kind of like icy, almost like toy piano quality to it, but it still has this like booming, terrifying bass. But yeah, I don't know. It's weird because like the reason why it's played is one of the characters is like, oh wow, we've got this really expensive sound system. Let's play a song, and he plays "Don't Like," and he's like, doesn't it sound so good? But for some inexplicable reason, it's the censored version, and like that boggles my mind. I don't know. It was
which is like literally half the words of the chorus are cut out.
Yeah, and it was very frustrating. I was just like, wow, I am so into this. My body is feeling this song, but then it's like, yeah, it's like half the words are gone, and it just feels weird. So, you do have, like, this movie does supply these sensory pleasures in one way. It's in some sense kind of like The Bling Ring, but directed, I feel like, by sort of a bastard stepchild of Olivier Assayas and Jacques Rivette. The first part of the movie, you don't really find out a whole lot of context about these teens, about why they're doing what they're doing. I mean, you can kind of it's not kind of, you can definitely draw a conclusion about why they're doing what they're doing, because there's little hints given about some things going on, some dirty things going on with a French bank who is sort of the subject of their attack. And I mean, just the world being the way it is in 2017, I think you can draw fair conclusions that these are teens who are kind of angry about the state of capitalism and about the world that is sort of pitted against them, and a world in which they have a decreasing number of opportunities. There have been a lot of people who've complained that this movie isn't specific enough in the ideologies of its characters, but I don't think that's a problem. I think you can A, sort of gather your own conclusions, but B, I also feel like it's very much a movie about being young, about trying on ideologies, about trying on identities, and sometimes doing things that are rash because you are trying to sort of figure out and make sense of the world. In this case, the rash thing that they do is, not just like being a dumb teenager, it's committing a terrorist attack that potentially kills people. We don't know for sure. A lot of the movie is kind of like, once they're in this mall, they don't really, the point is stressed that they can't really see or hear much of what's going on outside. The only way they can is through watching the news. So they're trying to figure out what's going on, and they're sort of throughout the night wrestling with these questions of like, what did we just do? Did we kill people? What is the significance of our actions? How is this going to change the world? And they're just trying to figure this out and put this together for themselves. Like they are at the same time trying on clothes and trying on, there's a great scene where one of the male characters, like puts on a suit and a wig and makeup and sings My Way. And it's like, he's doing this kind of almost this sort of drag, and is like trying to, in some sense, figure himself out. They are taking over the sound system of this mall and playing the music that they like. They are really trying to kind of assert their identities. But at the same time, it's like they have done these actions that I think you can interpret as being sort of anti-capitalist, but at the same time, they are indulging in these fantasies. And I feel like what Bonello is saying is like, we are constantly fed images sort of luxury, of the ideal life, which is always rooted in products and in consumerism. And it's like, even if you're trying to strike against that, when that is all how can you like not help but indulge in that? It's like, so they're trapped in this mall. How can they not help but like play around with the toys essentially that are all there? And I feel similarly sometimes. It's like, I am someone who's very frustrated with the system that exists in our world and wants a new one, but I legitimately a lot of times don't know how to conceive of what a new system or way of existing, not just for myself, but for the entire world and for all society would be. And so I can't help but like indulge in fantasies of like having material possessions, of having money, because those are the things that the images that I've been fed and the things that I've been weaned on and what I've been told is valuable. And I've really internalized that, as I think we probably all have. So I think this is a movie that's very much about that struggle. It's also, I think, really succeeds as a thriller. Bonello has been very open about his love of John Carpenter, and there's a lot in this movie that reminds me of Assault on Precinct 13, just having these people staked out in a single location. And even though we don't really, for a lot of the movie, see, the police approaching, you get this sense kind of impending doom. Occasionally it will cut outside the mall and you just hear sirens wailing. And there's something very uncanny about the movie. You sort of feel like you're watching it all in some sense through surveillance cameras. There are a few scenes that are explicitly you're watching a surveillance monitor, but even the ones that aren't framed in that way, there's still this eerie quality to them where it feels like you really kind of are aware of the fact that you're watching, even though you're kind of wrapped up in sort of the sensory pleasures of the music and of the images and the sort of John Carpenter-esque thriller quality. And speaking of John Carpenter, also really has an amazing synthesizer-driven score that any fan of Carpenter or of that sort of electronic milieu will just eat up. So it really succeeds both as a very genre thriller that's very heavy with suspense and really works on that level, but it also works in these sort of, I think, on these political dimensions. And it's just like a very sad movie. At a certain point you realize that these characters are sort of doomed because of their actions, and the rest of the movie is this sort of like tragic car crash free fall where you just know how it's going to end, even though you don't know exactly how it's going to end. You know that it's not going to end well. And so you just, at least for me, afterwards, walking out of the movie, I was just like emotionally consumed by it. I saw both this and Jackass back to back with Cinematary host Lydia Creech, who is not here tonight. And it's like after we left Nocturama, I just we didn't even really talk about the movie at all. Like I couldn't talk about it just because I was really kind of punched in the gut by it. Both by like, wow, this is so much my shit on a visual and sonic level, but also just how emotional it is and close to home in some ways, just with everything that's happening in the world and has been happening for the past few years.
Also seems like Lydia liked it a lot too.
Yes, we
I'm
both did.
Dying to see it. It seems like Netflix will probably be putting it up soon.
Yeah, there was a lot,
but there's no date.
They had listed. Picked up the rights initially, and were gonna do their whole put it up on Netflix to die thing that they do. But then something happened with that, and Grasshopper Film ended up distributing it. But a lot of Grasshopper stuff is on Netflix Instant, so I assume it will be available soon. And I've heard it's supposed to be available potentially within the month. So when it comes out, I really recommend watching it. But if you can, watch it somewhere with a great sound system, watch it somewhere with a large screen, watch it with a group of people, because it is one of those capital E experiences that will just consume you and leave you thinking about it for days afterwards. At least for me, at least for me. I think for a lot of other people too.
All right. Well, Nathan's talked for 30 minutes, so...
yeah, I'm so sorry.
Andrew, you and Reed saw a movie this week that's a relatively new release.
Yeah, we both saw Landline separately, I think in separate states, right? Reed, where did you watch this movie?
Yep, I saw it in Texas, so...
Okay, cool. Do you want to introduce it as someone who's not on the podcast as often as I am?
Sure, I can.
Right.
It's a movie by, probably going to pronounce her name wrong, but Gillian Robespierre. Anyone know?
I think that sounds right.
Correct
yeah.
enough, yeah. She did Obvious Child back in 2014, which is a movie I really, really enjoyed. I probably enjoy that one a bit more than this one, but this one also stars Jenny Slate, and it is kind of a mid-90s story about a dysfunctional family trying to figure out their lives together. I don't know how to better describe it, but basically it's kind of the same with Obvious Child for me. It's a Jenny Slate vehicle because I find her really delightful and entertaining, and she is that in this movie. She is hilarious. She will go from 1 second looking like she has no clue what's going on and just completely like blank stare to bust out laughing, and that there's just like a really cute element to that. I don't know how to I don't know. She's
Oh, for sure, yeah.
she's just delightful. But one of the I'm trying to. Do you know the young actress's name in the movie, Andrew?
Abby Quinn.
Yeah, that
Abby
is.
Quinn. She was a standout for me, even with how much I love Jenny Slate. I thought she was a terrific actress, and she gave a really strong performance. And it's a very
And she's playing Jenny Slate's younger sister in the movie, and she looks exactly like she could be Jenny Slate's younger sister. It's ridiculous.
yep. And they have such they have such good chemistry as sisters on screen. Basically, there's for me it was just like a really great movie to watch just for the performances. I just enjoyed watching these characters on screen and getting to know them because there wasn't a lot to the story or anything like that, but it was emotional and funny. I don't have a lot else to say about it. Andrew, how did you feel?
The story is a little all over the place. It doesn't have a single main character, really. You go back and forth between Jenny Slate and her insecurities about her oncoming marriage, as well as her father, John Turturro, who the daughters have recently found out is cheating on his wife. Jenny Slate commits an act of fidelity early on in this movie as well. So there's like the movie is asking you to draw parallels there and contrast the way that these two characters handle their transgressions against their partners. Jenny Slate's tact is to kind of be brutally honest and open up about what she's done. And I guess the movie asks us to question whether or not that is the right thing to do. It reminded me in a way of another movie that I've talked about on this podcast earlier this year, The Show About the Show, that Public Cinema screened at the Pilot Light earlier on in 2017, which is just fantastic. And I think we talked about it on the... Gosh, it was one of the documentary episodes. I've forgotten now. But another movie about brutally honest people in relationships fucking up and being real with their partners about it and like watching the fallout from that. But I think The Show About the Show is a lot more impactful and a lot more interesting and definitely more like formally experimental. This feels very pleasant. It's very quaint. It's very nice. But ultimately, it feels a little inconsequential at the end of the day. Though it was a fun experience, and I'm glad that Julian Robespierre gets to keep making movies, and I hope she continues making movies specifically with Jenny Slate because that's a really great team. But at the end of the day, it's not super memorable. I don't think it's going to be on my list at the end of the year or anything like that.
Yeah, that's pretty much how I felt. There's kind of a uniqueness to the Julian Robespierre's voice, though, which is interesting, because Obvious Child, I felt like really is a great movie about stand-up, among other things. I don't know, have you guys seen it?
Yes, I have. That's a pretty delightful movie, yeah.
Yeah, it's about a lot of stuff, but I think it's a great movie about stand-up and some other stuff, but this one, I think...
Just abortion.
Yeah.
Yeah, just abortion. It makes I'm sure this is not an original...
The other thing. Stand up and abortion.
This is not an original thought to have, but Obvious Child and Juno would make a good double feature, just considering how like they are both very mundane and matter of fact in the way they talk about choices relating to pregnancy. It's almost like both of those movies exist in a world where the giant like flaming issue of abortion does not exist, and people can just kind of make up their minds based on what is best for them at that moment.
Yeah, and I think that's more what I would get into here is this one doesn't really have kind of like the bite that maybe Obvious Child had with how like how just not stark, how honest it is in talking about abortion. This one is honest, but it's also just asking a bunch of questions and not really showing answers or anything, which is fine.
And
But
I'm just now realizing that we maybe have kind of buried the lead about Landline a little bit. The title is a hint at the fact that this is meant to be a 90s period piece, which I guess is the gimmick / selling point of the movie.
Yeah.
It's going to imagine a world in which people don't have connection to each other over the internet and telephone communication all the time. And what does that mean for the American family and for marriages, etc.? People are much more private and can kind of be invisible in a lot of ways. But I was underwhelmed by the 90s element of it. I was very interested in that going in, but I soon realized watching the film that it's kind of it's not very groundbreaking to do a 90s period piece because most movies set in the 21st century basically pretend that the internet doesn't exist anyways. So there's no difference between the world of Landline and the world of name any other modern rom-com.
Yeah, and the whole thing just felt a little tired, whereas her previous movie felt kind of exciting and unique. This one, I liked it, but it does feel a little tired. It's a nice movie to watch. That's about the best I can say about it.
I had a nice night at the movie theater, but it's not something I'm going to beg people to rush out and see.
All right. Well, I guess that is still playing in theaters if people want to check it out. That's Landline. We're going to take a short break. We will be back talking A Touch of Zen after this.
Hey, Cinematariats. This is your co-host Lydia Creech with an important message during this break in the show. Cinematary would like you to know that we do not want your money, and we don't want to place ads in the show at this time either. That's not why we do this. We do it because we enjoy each other's company, and we want to bring you our pure, unadulterated opinions on the world of cinema. However, there are a few things you can do to help out the show that we would greatly appreciate. First, leave us a review on iTunes, 4 or 5 stars only, to help us reach more listeners per the algorithm gods. Secondly, send us a tweet at Cinematary, or better yet, send us an email at zach@cinematary.com. That's Zach, Z-A-C-H, so we can hear from you guys for a change. I'd especially like to hear if you're a human and not an android who also likes Blade Runner, or maybe you have a suggestion of a movie you would really like to hear our opinions on. Regardless, let us know your thoughts and we will read them out and respond to them on future episodes of the show. Finally, please share the show with friends and members of your family who you think would enjoy listening to and participating in our film discussions that we bring to you guys every week. So, to recap, review, send us your thoughts through Twitter and email, and please share with your friends and family. We would greatly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Now back to the show.
We are back with part 2 of episode 157 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1971's A Touch of Zen. Disclaimer, bear with me on these names. Because again, let's go back to the earlier sponsor message where Zach has a cold and he's going to have to pronounce these names. Anyway.
But also, same as every week, pretty much. This, I mentioned off mic, this is basically going to be Zach's greatest hits episode for mispronouncing names. But to be fair, me too. It's gonna be tough.
Touch Zen. It was written and directed by King Hugh. The film stars Xu Fang, Shi Chun, Pai Ying, and Roy Chow. The film follows Gu. I can get that one. Follows Gu, an unmotivated artist in his early 30s who still lives with his mother, but is shaken from his comfortable rut by the arrival of beautiful and mysterious Yang, a princess on the run from General O Yang Nin, who murdered her entire family. Yang brings Gu
Goo. You said you could do that one.
Yang brings Gu into her circle of protectors, including Nin's rival, General Shi Wen Chao, and the nameless monk whose spiritual guidance transforms Gu into a valiant fighter. I made it through. Although filming began in 1968, A Touch of Zen was not completed until 1971. The original Taiwanese release was in two parts in 1970 and 1971, with filming on part 2 still ongoing when the first part was released. The bamboo forest sequence that concludes part 1 was reprised at the beginning of part 2, but the latest version has combined them for a runtime of 200 minutes. In 1971, they were both combined for the Hong Kong market with a runtime of 187 minutes. The film has been hailed for its cinematography, editing, and special effects, as well as its unusually thoughtful approach to the genre, with its strong thematic focus on Buddhism. The film makes strong use of symbolism throughout and is famous for its abstract, open-ended finale. The motif of spiderwebs is often used to symbolize the tangled and sinister nature of the East Chamber and the evil eunuch, and the manipulative nature of Yang. Elsewhere, the film employs a dark, moody tone, which enhances the sense of fantasy. Images of nature, the sun, and the use of lens flares are associated throughout with Buddhism and Abbot Hun Yun's convent. The final battle between Shu and Hu, which involve a number of mystical events, have been interpreted as a battle between good and evil, or as a parable about Buddhist religious virtues, the evil of worldliness and enlightenment. In 1976, the New York Times said, as a Renaissance man also credited with the film's art direction and costumes, King Hu, who reportedly spent several years on this king-sized, 3-hour project, is obviously as dedicated to visual beauty and meditative Zen concepts as he is to action, and his views of gloomy bamboo forest, sun-dampened green or rocky mountain canvases, rushing rivers and waterfalls make truly spectacular backgrounds to both the peaceful and warring moods of the monks and the combatants. In adapting his material from a collection of classic Chinese short stories, King Hu and his cooperative crew have given us a mite too much of a good thing, but they have added a touch of class to this touch of Zen. Way to go, New York Times. David Bordwell in 2016 for the Criterion Collection said, Hugh's films accept some standard plot materials of wuxia tales. There will be fights, of course, as well as disguises, pursuits, puzzling messages, and power struggles between idealistic knights and cruel officials. In the combat, warriors can execute gigantic jumps and wield palm power. A small smack can send an adversary staggering back for yards. Yet Hugh also remade the tradition. He enjoyed tying storylines together in a single locale, often an inn where fighters converge and scheme. He had his women warriors disguise themselves as young men. For A Touch of Zen, he added a supernatural dimension by grafting a swordplay saga onto a classic Chinese tale of a decrepit mansion inhabited by a mysterious, beautiful stranger. I can't think of another wuxia film of the period that postpones its first combat for this long, nearly an hour until fighting begins. On that note, On that note, what did you? What was your feelings on A Touch of Zen? I know we've talked about a wuxia film before when we did our Wong Kar-wai series with Ashes of Time, but I feel like this one is kind of going for different elements. I don't know, is that fair to say?
It's going for something very different. I'm similarly confused, though I don't think I'm as confused as I was in Ashes of Time, because I think there is a linear narrative here, as opposed to Ashes of Time, which feels very on the fly, made up as they were going. The visuals are kind of all over the place and disorienting. This is much more formal, much more patient in the way that it presents the story to you. But I have to be honest, I had a very hard time keeping track of characters and what they were talking about in many scenes. I know that you mentioned, Zach, in the info sheet that this movie was praised for focusing on visual beauty and tone over action, but it is still a movie that you experience in time with characters, with events unfolding, right? And although I can take a step back from it and see the arc of the film and what the characters do from beginning to end, like while I'm watching the movie and there are more than one character interacting, chances are I don't know who at least one of them are, and I probably don't know what they're talking about either. Am I the only person who had that experience?
I was very lost as well.
I mean, I was also lost. I mean, it's, this is a movie that like ends with two characters who are like not the characters it really begins with,
Yes, the main characters change many times over the course of the movie. I mean, you start with
the painter,
the character. Yeah, the painter, Goo, and then it seems like it wants you to pivot to focusing on Yang, the maybe ghost at the beginning of the story, and then after her, you start to focus on like the monk, and then there's this random general who comes out of nowhere in the last 30 minutes or so of the movie. Goo is left long ago by the time we get to that point. And Zach, when you were talking about how the monk like teaches Goo how to be a great warrior, did I miss that part? I don't remember that happening.
Well, like he has that part where he like plans all that stuff because the person comes to the house and they're killing all those soldiers, and then afterwards Goo's like walking around like ha 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 ha, I'm so smart, and then he has the moment of realization of like, oh God, all these people died. And then he gets a baby in a little bit. Yeah, and that the girl's gone. So he's like, well, shoot. Yeah, and then he gets a baby. So then that cuts to like him on a mountain, and then he gets a baby. And
I feel like that was the last time we saw him. Does he come back and learn how to do martial arts?
No, he goes to sleep, I think. Okay,
then something in the info sheet. Or maybe somebody saw a different cut of the movie than we did. It seems like there's a lot of cuts of this thing.
Yeah.
I think there is a like 3 hour and 20 minute cut.
Yikes. Well, didn't you say, Zach, that this was a...
Yeah, there is. That's what I was chalking a lot of my confusion up to that.
Didn't you say this was a compilation of multiple films initially released?
Yeah, I mean, there's I think the one I watched was 3 hours long. There's also a 3 hour, 20-minute long one, and there's an 187-minute one.
But didn't you say something about how when the movie first came out, they had taken two smaller movies and put it into one?
Oh, it was in two parts.
I feel like that really shows the idea that you're getting separate narratives stitched together over a really long runtime. And the second half of the movie feels very different from the first half of the movie, too. That first half is very character-based. It is more about mystery of who should be trusted and who's backstabbing who. And then in the second half, it's a lot of large armies that are all similarly dressed fighting other large armies that are similarly dressed, and you kind of lose track of who's who and who's fighting for what. At least I did. I don't know.
Honestly, that's maybe what I like about the movie a lot, is that it makes it feel a little more epic in scale. So you start out with kind of the personal story, and then he latches onto that, and you're drawn in, and you've got a good hour and a half of just that, and you get to know Goo real well, and falls in love with Miss Yang, or is infatuated with her. But then after that, you get kind of this broader story, almost it seems as China as a whole, where Miss Yang is kind of a stand-in and kind of this revolutionary character. And I don't know, I just liked that broader picture. Like it seemed more, it was, by the end, it felt more that it was about China and about Buddhism than it was about two characters.
I really liked the note that the movie lands on with the heavily symbolic Buddhist scene, that monk's final battle with the general dude. The long stretch of armies fighting, I maybe didn't connect with me because I feel like there was a void of stakes or conflict in the first place, that it couldn't necessarily ramp up to something bigger, because you start with, okay, once you kind of figure out you need to follow Yang as a character, you find out that she's on the run from the government, and she's on the run from the government because they killed her dad and now want to kill her, and it's never quite clear why they killed her dad. And I mean, maybe he revealed.
He had information on corruption.
Yeah, he has information, and he shares information, but like what that information actually is or why the government's upset about it, you can only really chalk it up to like government bad. And when you're just starting with government bad wants to kill good person, and you're ramping it up to giant scale, like nationwide fighting, it feels very hard for me to care about the large scale scenes.
I think it just has characters pointing towards that. So maybe I'm completely wrong, but I don't think the movie is very much about Gu and Yang, even though they are the main characters and the ones you see the most. I think, and this might be something wrong with the movie, I didn't have a problem with it, but I think they just kind of point you towards the monks in that position of good, and they point you towards the government in that position of evil, and that sets you up for what comes later.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I don't know. I mean, I think this is a kind of an easy and classic comparison to make, saying that like wuxia movies are the westerns of China, both in that they're set in this sort of vague, but at the same time specific imagined past. And, I think that the characters are really more ciphers, I guess, and representative of certain, good, evil, morals, ideas, religious traditions, whatever. I think that's, I don't know. I think I agree with the read that they're just sort of pointing you in this ideological direction rather than being specific characters, which is frustrating. But
for a movie
I guess this
long.
is definitely. For there were moments where I did find myself drifting, but then it's like every time I do find myself starting to drift, there's something visual that pulls me back in. So, which is always, that's always such a difficult thing, the classic debate of like, well, this movie is frustrating and doesn't make sense. And then, me countering with like, well, it looks cool. Like, there's no real argument at the end of the day. Like, cause I think we can all agree that it looks cool, but like, that doesn't like make you like it anymore or make you less frustrated.
And we should go back to like the specific ways that it looks cool in just a minute. But I also wanted to make the point that I think that this is one of those movies where everything about it that bothers me could be considered part of the point of the movie and could be considered praise for the movie from the perspective of somebody else. Like this idea of having an epic that is favoring a constantly shifting constellation of characters rather than a single central character, an epic that doesn't really pay a lot of attention to its central conflict and moves very slowly. That sounds like this perfect cinematic expression of Zen Buddhism, right? And you have this monk character who becomes very important in the last act. He's always framed in front of the sun. He fights only defensively, really, but he's still invulnerable. And at the end, it leans so hard into Buddhist iconography that it kind of shows him reaching nirvana and becoming this meditating silhouette off in the distance. And if you keep that at the forefront of your mind, you can kind of see the ideology of why the director made the choices that he did make in structuring the rest of the movie as it is. Like, it kind of forces you to be patient and have a clear mind and like not focus on the specific conflict, but like the larger picture. And that totally makes sense to me as a Buddhist epic. The question is, do I necessarily enjoy watching said Buddhist epic? But I guess the pleasure comes from the visual elements of it, which I guess we can get into.
No, it's okay. I just real quick before we go more to visual stuff. I think then it's like it becomes sort of a metaphor for itself. Then it's like the audience is sort of at least supposed to go maybe on this journey towards enlightenment. Where like you say, you're supposed to kind of have this clear mind, freed from these from these questions and these narrative concerns, and then it ends on this clear note of nirvana. But that experience of getting there is I will admit, pretty difficult.
Yeah, I was just gonna say one thing I kept having to remind myself throughout, which isn't always a great sign for a movie, but as a Westerner who has a decent understanding of Buddhism and some Eastern religions, at least more so than most Westerners, I still assume I'm missing 90% of the iconography and metaphor in this movie.
Absolutely.
So I think that last like 5 minutes, that's easy to latch onto because it's more in your face and more stuff we'd recognize. I wonder how much of that is through the film, where if we were culturally as knowledgeable as someone that grew up in that culture, we would latch onto it immediately. I don't know.
You're probably right, yeah. So should we get into the It Looks Cool section of the podcast? What about this movie did we like looking at?
Yeah.
I think, well, one of the ways that I feel like or one of the things that has really sort of informed my experience with wuxia films is this great little short film. I don't think it's available online, but it might be on like Fandor or something. This great short film called Mount Song by the experimental filmmaker Shambhavi Kaul. And she has taken a lot of specific individual shots from various wuxia films. And all of these shots don't have people in them. They're just buildings and nature. And what I like about this movie is that you essentially have something like that kind of in the film itself. You know, the beginning is just this, you know, you have the spider web, and then you just sort of have nature, and then you see the fort, and it's just this very slow. I mean, in terms of the pacing and the rhythm, it's not actually that slow, but just in terms of what you're seeing and the fact that you're not seeing people and you're not immediately being thrust into some kind of story or plot, I just find that, I don't know, that's just sort of enchanting to me. And again and again throughout the movie, there are certain moments that's like, very rarely does a movie capture some of these things, like, you know, the mist, or the leaves falling, just these little details that, you know, because this is a studio produced film, we're probably all constructed, but I feel like even within most studio made films, regardless of maybe which country they're made in or what industry, I feel like a lot of times those sort of natural details are left to the wayside. And I also, one thing I really like about King Hu's movies, I think Dragon Inn also does this really well, is there's a lot of amazing blocking. Like, there will just be these shots where there's one I'm thinking of, I can't remember, like, you know, which is a clear indication of kind of how confusing, at least, you know, for me and for us generally, this movie was. I don't remember which three characters are in this shot, but I just remember there are three characters who are sort of arranged, you know, lower, middle, higher, you know, just going up. And there will be other shots where there's a character in the back and a character sort of in the middle and a character in the front. And you just get this really clear sense of space. And I just love that a lot. Just, I mean, not only does it kind of, even if you don't know who the characters are, maybe you know where they are, which I like, but also it's just this, I don't know, there's just this kind of geometry to it that I just find so appealing. And
the way they block spaces and objects too is really interesting. And I want to come back to your point about the fact that this was made on a studio set probably in a minute. But the beginning specifically, when you're really just getting a montage of nature, you keep getting closer and closer to this village and this haunted mansion. It keeps giving you these shots that slowly pan down to like give you a perfectly symmetrical view of an object. And we are kind of conditioned to, when we see a shot like that, we're being introduced to a space slowly through this moving motion, that we're expecting a human to walk into that shot. Like, it's going to hang on there for a minute, and this is where we're going to get introduced to the people of the movie. But it just keeps giving you shots like that. We slowly pan over to a building, nothing happens. We slowly pan over to a doorway, nothing happens. We slowly pan over to the outside walls, nothing happens. And it just like keeps setting up this expectation of all right, humanity is entering the story, but not yet. You know, it really allows time to breathe and for you to just dwell on the natural beauty of this space. And coming back to your point, Nathan, it's, again, not natural beauty. It's made by people. And that almost gives it a heightened quality because everything has to be painted in more vivid colors and things like that. It feels more supernatural than it does natural.
There is a real quick letterbox blurb by Matt Lynch that I want to read part of, because I feel like that sort of natural into the supernatural concern applies to the plot of the movie. I think this was something that I didn't even really think about until reading this, but he says that King Hu famously continues to restore to film from Chinese literature The Female Knight, another piece of the past that now points forward, and the male hero finds his strength only after he sleeps with her and meets the abbot. The power here is sexual, literally balls to bones, naturally emanating from within. The villain, corrupt and unseen, is a eunuch. His power is baseless, empty, founded on lies. Sex versus death. The film folds themes in so gradually that you truly float down the river without ever seeming to get wet, which I think is a really great way sort of summing up the conflict of this movie as even sort of more general and beyond just, you know, Buddhism and whatever else. It's just kind of nature versus those who want to sort of restrain and control nature, which then, you know, there's a contradiction there that, you know, this is a controlled, constructed nature because it's a movie. But still, like, I think...
Yeah, that's terrific.
The entanglement of the themes with the images then is kind of beautiful to me. I don't know. Anyway, Reed.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. That's a way I haven't looked at it, but I really like that. Talking about the images and themes entangling, though, we open with all the spiderweb images of as you guys have talked about, but I think one of the most fascinating parts of this movie is how King Hu makes the rest of the movie feel like it's a spiderweb. So the lighting, there's often you're in this building that's essentially ruins. It's overgrown, everything like that, and the light's often streaming through the windows and through the walls that are outside of the windows, and you see just cracks of light coming through and glimpses of light. He doesn't really try that hard to light up the space within it unnaturally, and I think that's like a really fascinating way that he makes it feel like the characters are always hiding and then in the light and then in the dark, almost like a maze. And the camera a lot of times will move that way too. So especially in the first segment of the movie where you have Gu kind of following around people that he's suspicious of, trying to figure out what's going on, the camera will often move and zoom in or out at the same time. Did you guys catch the... And
another thing that's weird about the camera movement and the zooms in this movie is that he uses a fisheye lens a lot. And you don't usually see a fisheye lens and a moving camera at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so when you do here, it has a psychedelic effect almost, because everything on the edges of the frame is like warping as you are looking at different spaces in the set.
Yeah, so you have like that distorted pan plus like the camera just kind of floating in and out of the characters, almost like a maze, like it's kind of webbing these characters together. And I really thought that was terrific about the movie, the lighting. And
then there's those details, like, you know, towards the end when the monks are flying through the forest. I mean, first of all, it's, you know, they're flying through the forest. That's already this kind of extraordinary evocative image. But then he keeps cutting to just like the water glistening, and it's just like the way the light bounces off of that. I feel like it's, I don't know, it's almost like a Jody Mack movie or something. It's just like this, like at once just very peaceful, but also very psychedelic. And that is, I don't know, such a strange choice to cut from this battle sequence to just the most serene image. But I think it creates this mental link, you know, between these monks who are so calm and assured as they are, you know, essentially going into battle. You know, it's, I think, it like goes back to some of the foremost principles of montage and of editing and of, the kind of the associative mental link that is conjured by pairing two together. But in this way, and it's a way that like is abstract and doesn't, work on a narrative a cohesive level, but it makes sense. I don't know.
This is not a super profound connection to make, but I was also thinking about Ho Xiaoshen's movie The Assassin, which I really liked despite not understanding it all really. There's a scene early on in The Assassin where you're getting a close-up shot. I think it's a handheld camera. It is just shaking up and down as all these warriors are fighting in the middle of a woods. And then it cuts to a much wider shot of the same scene, but the shot is so wide that these warriors are incredibly far away, and you are really just looking at a river rushing by, and the fight seems very insignificant. And he spends more time on the wide shot than he does on the close-up handheld stuff. And I think the similar ethos is all throughout Touch of Zen. But can we talk about flying battle sequences? I mean, this is a thing that's in a bunch of wuxia movies, and I felt like it was handled a little bit differently here. I wasn't sure if it was handled differently just because of the time period and the technology that was available, but it seemed much more like I could see the strings, not literal strings, but how it was done, as opposed to a lot of modern wuxia stuff. It literally just feels like magic. Like, how is the thing that I'm looking at actually happening? Here, I see a lot of close-up shots where a character who's fighting will jump out of the frame and then cut to somewhere else, and they will jump into the frame, and we're supposed to imagine that they flew through the air in between those two shots. But we don't really see a lot of flying monks or flying martial artists. It leaves a lot of it to your imagination. I was a little bummed out. I wanted more flying stuff. Nathan, is this just a thing from the time period, or was this a deliberate choice on King's part?
I don't know. I think that's a good question. I mean, there's definitely, I think there are definitely films from the time period, I mean, most of the wuxia movies that I've seen which are most of the wuxia movies that other white westerns have seen, are from kind of later 70s, 80s Shaw Brothers movies, and I think those movies do go further with the big leaps and stuff. But at the same time, it's like those feel so much less natural, even though there are many things about this where it's obvious that it's constructed, and then as you mentioned, the jumps really show the strings, and you can tell that it's being cut in a way to kind of cover up for the gaps that obviously exist. I feel like being able to shoot in the kind of environment it is with these beautiful pine trees, and it's like, I don't think he would be able to do that if he were to really get the huge jumps. I think it's just kind of probably a matter of compromise at the end of the day between, I don't know, shooting on, because some of the, like, one of my favorite Shaw Brothers movies is 8 Diagram Pole Fighter, which like really looks super fake, and that's one of the things I like about it. Like, it's just like, clearly you have this kind of matte painting green sky, and I mean, there's some incredible acrobatic stuff going on, and like, it's all wire work, but it's like the artificiality of that is very apparent, and that's something I appreciate with that. But in this, it's like, at the same time, I know it's artificial, but there's something about it that is, like you said, I think that's the best way of putting it, is more supernatural almost, as opposed to maybe staged or something. But even then, it's like, you get to something like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which obviously took a lot of influence from this movie. And like, those kind of the more digital wire work stuff. And that's also kind of in Hero, too.
I love Hero.
It's
so
like,
much. I think that's my favorite wuxia
Hero
movie.
is so beautiful, but some of the really, I don't know. I think I like this more just because sometimes a character will leap so high where I'm just kind of taken out of it in a way that I can still appreciate. But this, to me, was more just like magic. I don't know.
Zach, we haven't heard much from you. Any thoughts?
No, it's not because I'm, I agree with. One, I'm choking on my own like illness, and two, I agree with all of what you've been talking about. I don't know. I don't really have a very strong opinion on the movie. I didn't dislike it or think it was bad at all. I enjoyed it, even though I was incredibly confused. I don't know. I was thinking of that kind of description of it. It's such a breezy movie. I think that, Nathan, this description you read where it's like floating down a river without touching the water is good, because you kind of have that gliding sensation while you're watching these characters go about whatever the hell they're doing, because I had no idea. But I was thinking a lot about this video essay, which I've been watching like 50 times a day lately, and it's Koga Nada's video essay on Ozu, the way of Ozu, and he structures the essay, and it has these three screens, and it's showing scenes from various Ozu movies that kind of overlap and seem similar. And it's not really any talking sequences. It's just them. It's either just kind of a room or a noise or a musical cue or an act that characters kind of do. And there just seems to be this kind of breathlessness to it, and this it's all the same thing, but at the same time it's not. There's like this uniqueness to it, and I kind of am able to embody that space with Ozu, but for some reason I'm just not able to do it with wuxia, and I think I should watch more wuxia films, but I make that comparison because I feel like that's a very similar experience to how you should be taking in A Touch of Zen. And I don't know, I tried to do that to the best of my abilities, but I don't know,
I wonder if it's because wuxia movies are so much a genre as opposed to what Ozu's doing, which is more mundane family drama. It's more emotionally based.
Yeah.
Whereas this is so much more rooted in action and convention.
Yeah, and this is like so much rooted in one of the things about not being able to differentiate the characters is like, even if even if we can't hang on to the specifics of who they are, it's like you can tell kind of who is supposed to be who, just, the colors they're wearing, or, those kind of just visual trope languages, I feel like, that it's relying on.
But at the same time, I really enjoy the like religious imagery. Like, I really loved just kind of that kind of holy space that you would like, that you entered, especially like in the last 10 minutes or so. It becomes like the sequence that like seems like something just like almost out of body. It was funny, the way the movie feels kind of structured. It reminds me of like the Hollywood epics like Ben-Hur or the Ten Commandments. And so that kind of helped to frame my sense of mind with watching it. But I think that the religious the imagery that it posed for you, and kind of, especially again in that last 10 minutes, there was just something so I don't know, like you could understand why the characters were kind of awestruck, because you as the audience were awestruck as well. But kind of wrapping up, anybody have any final thoughts on Touch of Zen before we finish?
Not really. Just watch more wuxia.
Nope.
Watch more Chinese film in general, regardless of Hong Kong, Taiwan, mainland. Just watch more.
Watch Hero. It's really good.
All right, well, that will wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we post all of the movies that we talked about in this episode. Next week, we will be continuing our Young Critics series with 1975's Barry Lyndon. In that episode, we're going to be joined by guest James Nairmore, who wrote the book on Kubrick for the BFI, who's going to be discussing this very I don't know how to. It's an interesting Kubrick
daunting
movie. Yeah, it's a very
daunting Kubrick movie.
It's a very daunting Kubrick movie.
I think the word you're looking for is long.
It is a very long one as well. I was talking about this last week. I don't know why we decided to do two incredibly long movies back to back, but here we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, loving it.
And then we have another guest that next week. So doing some serious stuff to wrap up this series.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, please come back next week. Barry Lyndon with James Nairmore. But thank you guys for listening, and we will see you next week.